make it just a perfect end to a perfect day. Thank you. That just leaves us to say, have the best Christmas ever. We're going to join the party. Bye-bye.
You can enjoy the magic of Disney at 11 o'clock each morning this week, starting on Boxing Day, with Jules Verne's In Search of the Castaways.
This Christmas, Fievel goes west and discovers a familiar foe behind the new frontier.
We need you, Sheriff Burke. The cats are going to turn us into mouse burgers.
But with a little canine cunning, the battle's on. In 15 minutes.
This is Mr. Kimball, your new kindergarten teacher.
They're 6-year-olds. How much trouble can they be?
Kindergarten Cop, Boxing Day, 6:25.
Christmas wouldn't be Christmas without carols, and we can all join in many of the old favourites tonight at 11:45, when carols on Christmas Eve comes from St Margaret of Scotland's Church in Stirling. Here on BBC One now, the early evening news at 5:15 with Chris Lowe.
The latest Bosnian ceasefire came into effect 6 hours ago. Most of the guns have fallen silent. The countdown to new peace talks has begun. And the QE2 is still not shipshape, but off to the sun she goes. Good evening. The Christmas truce in Bosnia, which came into effect late this morning, appears to be holding. The latest ceasefire was negotiated by the former American President Jimmy Carter and followed months of deadlock in the peace process.
Early this morning, up on the Serbian positions overlooking Sarajevo, the ceasefire was already in operation. The snipers' rifles were unused, and the other weaponry was hung up under the icicles. As for the ragtag soldiers who man these positions, they insist they won't return fire if the Muslims shoot at them. But they still didn't think that the ceasefire would last. If the past is anything to go by, this ceasefire, assuming that is that it's agreed in the first place, is by no means certain to succeed. Both sides enter into these kind of things for purely tactical reasons, not necessarily because they want peace. And so, at noon, 24 hours after the Serbs had called their ceasefire, the Bosnian government forces followed suit. Yet everything here is relative, and someone was certainly still firing. But the UN thinks both sides want a respite at present, especially the Serbs.
They realise that the strategic balances are tilting against them and that the rate of a tilt will increase. And I think they have worked out that it's in their interest and in the interest of the people of Bosnia-Herzegovina to bring this terrible conflict to an end.
Christmas Eve at the Catholic Cathedral here. The newly appointed cardinal told the congregation that people could only rely on God for peace. There was no one else to turn to. John Simpson, BBC News, Sarajevo.
Gunmen have taken more than 250 passengers hostage after boarding an Air France plane at Algiers airport. They've since released a number of women and children. The plane was due to fly to Paris, from where our correspondent Kevin Connolly has the latest.
For relatives of the passengers on this Air France plane from Algiers, a tense and frightening Christmas Eve. They went to Orly Airport to meet the flight and find themselves waiting now for news of what has become of friends and relatives. But there has been little news from Algeria since a group of armed men took control of the aircraft as it was preparing to take off. Since then, they have released small groups of women and children, but they've given no sign of who they are or what they intend to do. Islamic fundamentalists launched a heavily armed insurrection in Algeria almost 3 years ago, after elections they expected to win were cancelled. Foreign businesses and foreign individuals have often been among their targets. Kevin Connolly, BBC News, Paris.
The QE2 has finally left New York for its Caribbean Christmas cruise 37 hours late. The luxury liner was declared unfit to sail by the US Coast Guard yesterday because she didn't meet safety standards. The ship's owners, Cunard, have admitted that the QE2 should not have left Southampton last week.
Departure schedules had come and gone, but this was it. A cruise load of whinging Lotus Seekers sharing a shakily reborn QE2 with British plumbers for work in progress.
The longer it stays, the more money we get. Lovely. Let's go. Come on.
He's running towards sunny overtime in the Caribbean now that the QE2 has dropped Florida as next destination. Cunard's priority is to placate the near mutinous passengers, even as the liner was nudged into the Hudson River, having been cleared by the US Coast Guard. Work teams were in action. It was worries about routine fire precautions in the stern that brought the US Coast Guard intervention. Holes and bulkheads were blamed by Cunard on renovation in Germany. The net result was the QE2 became the first liner detained in New York in 25 years. It was a body blow for Cunard's flagship, compounding days of ham-handed management. Now the company faces massive lawsuits in a state where damages can go sky high. Brian Barron, BBC News, New York.
The Chechen capital Grozny has again been hit by Russian airstrikes. On the ground, Russian tanks are trying to complete their blockade of the city and bring down the republic's separatist government. Extra artillery has been brought in and fighting has increased on a new front around the village of Argun to the east.
By day, the Chechen capital is already looking like a city in ruins. These are blocks of flats, not strategic targets. Soon there won't be much left here for the Russian troops to invade. Who do they think they're bombing? I'm Russian, says this man. Why does that drunkard Yeltsin attack us, asks another. This woman says she'd give her life in return for her young relatives. Before the war, ethnic Russians made up a quarter of Grozny's population. While many Chechen families have fled the capital, this isolated minority has been left behind. Russian communities are being torn apart by the almost constant bombardment by Russian aircraft. 10 miles outside Grozny, the town of Argun has also been caught up in the fighting. This was the local school. Again, civilian areas have borne the brunt of the air raids. Again, the bombs have fallen indiscriminately. Tonight, Russian troops are closing in on the Chechen capital. If they push through Argun, they'll control the entire length of this road, and they'll have effectively cut off Grozny from the outside world. Lawrence MacDonald, BBC News, on the Chechen border.
Cheshire police, hunting the murderers of a woman who was doused in petrol and set on fire, are looking for two men who kidnapped her in Birmingham. 31-year-old Tracy Ann Mertens was found on the steps of a church in Congleton yesterday afternoon and died today. She'd been kidnapped from a house in the Nechells area of Birmingham by two men in a yellow-red Escort. A surgeon who's carrying the HIV virus, which can lead to AIDS, has been named as Professor George Browning. He's an ear specialist working in Glasgow. The local health board said he'd agreed to be named so it would be easier to get in touch with his past patients, and they emphasised that they faced only the tiniest risk of infection. Shopkeepers are predicting a record seasonal spending boom this Christmas. The British Retail Consortium, which represents 90% of shopkeepers, says it expects to have taken £20 billion over the counter.
Peace on the streets of Belfast has resulted